you're there to represent the stockholders to create the most value you can. And I always kept that at the forefront of my thought processes.
I wanted to be on the HR because it was the people. The employees, and making sure that from an equity perspective, that they weren't just talking about diversity, but to be on those committees and to be able to use that voice to form policy and to ask the courageous questions.
I wanted to do it for two reasons. Very personally, I enjoy stress.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Angela M. Hill. I'm an investigative journalist and producer, most recently with the Washington Post. I've also worked on national investigative teams with Scripps News Washington Bureau, as well as ABC News Network in New York City. And I'm serving as the Ida B. Wells Professor of Investigative Journalism at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University, based in Washington, D.C. That's a mouthful. I have the distinct pleasure to be here with Mr. Barry Lawson Williams, the retired managing general partner of Williams Pacific Ventures, an investment and consulting company focused on startups, acquisitions, and real estate. Barry, it's great to share this space with you. Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Great to be with you.
Before we get started, just a housekeeping note for our attendees. Please use the Q&A box to post your questions rather than the chat box. Again, the chat box is not open. So again, if you have questions, please post them in the Q&A box. So with that, Barry, let's go ahead and get started. You've been a successful businessman, lawyer, have served on many corporate boards. You've made significant impacts and contributions throughout your career. And given the fact that you're retired, you could be spending all of your free time and time in general traveling and enjoying your family. But instead, you are on a bit of a mission here. Why is pushing for having more Black people, and in our case, Black journalists, being a part of boards your focus and in an area that you're spending so much of your time and energy on?
Let me describe my background quickly, and that is that I graduated and went on and got a joint degree in law and business. And I really thought the only reason I went to business school was to become a better corporate lawyer. But I fell in love with business. And then I had a career in business, working for McKinsey, the consulting firm, and getting a chance to work internationally. And then with the Bechtel Group, the engineering construction company, and then I formed my own company. Along the way, I started serving on boards, and I got on my first board quite early in my life. I wasn't a senior executive. I wasn't a CFO. I wasn't in the executive suite. So I wasn't your typical board candidate, and I got on via referrals. And then I went on to serve on 16 public company boards and some private company boards. And I retired, as you noted, 8 years ago, and at the retirement age, most boards have. But I had a lot of energy. And because of my background of being a non-traditional candidate, and because I kept finding out that talent can reside anywhere, and you got to just find talent and expose it to opportunity. So I set about trying to find minority talent, and I found that there is ample amount of minority talent already qualified to serve on boards. And from my experiences on corporate boards, each board is different, and it takes different people to make a board successful. So I think people like journalists and educators are perfect candidates for boards. You don't want everybody to be the same. You don't want groupthink at the board. And I think that business ought to recognize, to get the outstanding performance that we require of business, they got to take advantage of all the talent that's out there.
Yeah. Well, you've said a mouthful there, and it's a great preamble. I want to move forward, and as we do, really unpack some of the things you've said, like the fact that you've served on multiple boards, why journalists are great fits for a board. So let's begin to unpack that a little bit at a time. But before I do, I want to ask you, what do most boardrooms look like today? And how has that changed, let's say, over the past 20 to 30 years? And where are still some of those deficits?
Well, the way boards fundamentally have changed is they're getting away from the old paradigm where you only chose sitting or retired CEOs, and CFOs. I think boards are recognizing they need a wider range of skills. And I've been taking inventory. I don't have a big study, but I've taken inventory of the kind of skills that boards need to be successful in the future. And I'm finding that they're very different from the skill set of people who have traditionally served on boards. So some companies are recognizing that, getting ahead of the curve, and other people, because of the process of getting on boards and how you stay on boards, are a little behind the curve, and we've got to get them up to speed.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that too, in terms of the process. You talked a little bit about how, most of the times you're referred to be on the board. But before we get there, talk with me a little bit about, why it's important to consider and be a participant on a corporate board for Black people, particularly for us as journalists, because you've talked to over 100 corporate board members, right? And I want to kind of get a sense of, why they feel it's important, your own experiences as to why it's important to be a part of boards as Black folks, and particularly as journalists.
Well, let me talk first about my situation. I love strategy. I love meeting and working with really smart people on complex issues. And that's what boards were about. I came to realize once I was on a board that boards impact heavily our communities. Mm-hmm. So in terms of employment, in terms of spending, in terms of philanthropy, boards impact our local communities a lot. So that's the main argument I have for Black people and other minorities serving on boards. Mm-hmm. They impact our communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to realize that, right? I think sometimes we might forget the power and authority that boards have, right, in terms of helping to determine the direction that a company might go and their involvement in the community. It's no secret that over the past couple of years, over the past few years, as we talk about more Black people and people of color being on boards, it's no secret that DEI initiatives have experienced some notable challenges, some severe headwinds. How has that impacted the push for diverse board representation? Like, what are you seeing now in that space in terms of conversations around DEI and its importance, and the fact that in some cases it's under attack? How is that impacting some of the diversity that we may or may not be seeing on boards?
Well, let's start with the numbers. Clearly, after George Floyd and related incidents, there was much more momentum to get more minority representation on boards. That has slowed down, and corporations have been a lot less vocal in their stances in DEI, ESG, etc. Mm-hmm. My concern is the only voices, the loud voices out there now, are the anti-DEI. Mm-hmm. So I think it's upon us to speak up and make sure there are more vocal voices out there, or else people will start to believe the more vocal voices.
Do you feel that people are speaking up? Do you get a sense that those folks who are in these positions of power and authority are recognizing the headwinds and the challenges that DEI are facing and are speaking up?
Not enough. I think that the message I got from this study that I did that you referred to, it's called 100 Black Voices, and you can get it on the website 100blackvoices.com.
Mm-hmm.
The message is that there's a lot we can do.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we need allies, and sure, we need change. However, it starts with us. It's in our hands. And one of the things we can do is have more of us speak up in a coordinated fashion at the same time. And the reason we should speak up is I like to stress to people that diversity is not the goal. Diversity is just a vehicle. Diversity prevents groupthink.
Mm-hmm.
Diversity helps, and it's shown, and better thinking leads to better performance, leads to increases in shareholder value. That's what this is all about. So we're not asking business for any favors. We're asking the same thing that is the fundamental interest in business: increase shareholder value. And you get that by diversity of thinking with people who've had different lived experiences. And I'm talking about qualified people
Mm-hmm.
first,
Mm-hmm.
who happen to be diverse.
Right.
Now, it's interesting because I've been thinking, why would you think people like journalists or educators would be good board members? And let me start with educators, because I talked to the former president of Howard University, Wayne Frederick. And Wayne got in my face. He said, I'm not a traditional candidate. He said, I run 6 faculties. Those are business lines. He says, I run an athletic program. That's a growth opportunity. I run a hospital. That's a new market. He said, I'm just an ordinary business like any other CEO. So let's take journalists. From my experience, there are several things that are key to being effective in the boardroom. You've got to be a good listener and balance that with knowing when to speak up.
Yeah.
You got to be able to ask good questions that move the discussion along. And you got to ask the right questions, and you got to work with people. And I think those are things that journalists do all the time.
Yeah.
So in boardroom, as I said, you got to think strategically. You got to be able to work with people, and you got to be able to work in crisis situations.
Yeah.
That's what I define a journalist.
Well, I mean, that's absolutely the case. I want to kind of unpack this a little bit more. But before I do that, we were talking about just a little bit ago about the sort of the state of the board, like the DEI, the headwinds, the challenges that, people may foresee. And, you've spoken with, over 100 board members. That's quite impressive. And I'm not talking about a quick little conversation, long, in-depth interviews that you've done with board members all across the country. And, we had a little bit of a glitch in our video at the top, but there's another video that I want us to come to, and I want us to take the moment to share, because I want us to hear kind of what these other folks that you've interviewed have said about what the state of the board is right now. So we're going to go ahead and roll that clip if we have it.
My concern about the environment, though, is the board positions are going to come to people like me right now because I'm already a proven entity, when what we really need is net new directors.
There's impedance in the system. I mean, they'll revert back to the way it was if we don't keep our foot on the gas, on the accelerator. And all of us have to do that. What you're doing now, developing new talent. Those of us that are on boards, having some pull factor, not just push factor, is important.
You cannot really inspire change until you have enough people walking the same path. And here's the key, and here's what's hard to do: at the same time.
So a lot of thoughts unpacked there, and I think it sort of like hits on the direction we're about to take this conversation. I mean, one of the board members in that video, the first woman, Kahina Van Dyke, she talked about the need for net new directors, right? We're having this discussion because we'd like to see more Black journalists as some of these new board directors. And you started to talk a little bit about this in your conversation with the president of Howard University, basically saying, like, it sounds like almost questioning, I've got all these other things going on. Do I have the right skill sets, or am I appropriate for a board? And so I want to get back to this question of like, how are journalists' unique skills and perspectives useful in board participation? And what impact can that participation have on driving corporate change as well as corporate accountability, right? Because a lot of what we do as journalists is holding people accountable, exposing and sharing different perspectives and ideas. And so talk with me a little bit about sort of like the unique skill sets that educators and particularly journalists bring to this conversation for board representation.
No, I think journalists, as I indicated, are well equipped to listen to people, to figure out what's the right question to ask, to figure out when to ask that question so you can move towards a coordinated answer. I just want to point out there are 2 or 3 real obstacles to continuing to increase minority representation on boards. The first is the referral system, which accounts for like 60 or so % still of board selections. Search has increased, but still search is the minority of selections. And many times search is just vetting background checks on people the board has recommended. And they're going to recommend people like them, and they're going to recommend friends. So what I tell CEOs and head of nomination and governance committees, I want to make sure that my qualified minority friends are your qualified minority friends. So we got to figure out a way in advance of searches that people in positions to make those determinations know about you and can get comfortable with you. The other thing we need to do,
if I can just pick up on that point real quick, Barry, it makes me think about something that, one of my mentors, he became my mentor when I was at ABC News Network in New York. And we were kind of having this conversation about, networking and making sure people, you know the right people. And, my argument at the time was, it's so important in network. It's important for me to know all the right people and make sure that I'm staying connected. And he said to me, absolutely, you're absolutely right. But he said, what's probably more important is not who you know, but who knows you, right? And so I think you're hitting at this notion here with, it's great to have all these skill sets that, of course, we journalists bring to the table. But, it does us no good if people don't know that we're interested in serving on a board, or if people don't know how well we're qualified. So I just wanted to kind of pick up on that point of like, it's great to know people, but if they don't know you and if they're not considering you as someone who would be great for a board, then it doesn't help our cause to have more of us on these corporate boards. So I just wanted to.
And I have to emphasize what you said. You never know who's watching you and for what reason. So the way I got on my first board was I demonstrated leadership on a hospital board in San Francisco and eventually became chair. An investment banker from a different hospital heard of my work. And when there was an opportunity to throw names into a hat for a board, he put my name in. So many times you will not know how that first board came about or what have you. So it's important to work harder in your job, continue to show excellence on your day job. And it's important to make sure you keep broadening that network. Let me tell you about the second thing I wanted to emphasize, then I'll let you go. But this is a very important point to me.
Okay, if I could just, before I can, because I think this point is so important, because a lot of people on here have not been on boards. They don't even know how to get on boards, right? And how to be considered. So just to piggyback off of what you're saying, can we talk a little bit more just about what we need to be doing to be ready to be on the board, right? Like corporate board readiness. I mean, yes, have your resume ready. We're doing all the right things, but I just want to like belabor this point just a little bit, just so people are thinking about these are the things I need to be doing to be considered. Whether it's a board position that you actively go after, or whether someone is watching you, being able to see who you are just beyond your resume, if you understand the point that I'm trying to make here.
See, you just demonstrated why journalists would be good on boards, because I wanted to go off in a different direction and you made sure I stayed focused. No, I think it's important, and most people thought it was important, to get some not-for-profit board experience, so that you learn governance. You learn how you want to operate in the boardroom. You develop your style. And of course, on those boards, you will run into people who could recommend you for-profit boards. It goes without saying that you should not go on a not-for-profit board primarily to get on a for-profit board. But you will learn the critical skills that will prepare you. And those would be governance. Those would be demonstrating leadership. And those would be networking with the right people.
Awesome. All right, I'll let you get to your second point now.
No, it's very important. You mentioned the resume. We should deal with that. I think it's important that you develop a resume. I carefully didn't use the word dust off, because your board resume is quite different in my mind from your work resume.
Unpack that a little bit.
Your board resume talks about your skill sets and what you can bring to the table and what do you want to accomplish on a board, as opposed to your past history. Past history is fine, but that's just to develop your thoughts about what you can bring to the table. And the most important thing in a board resume is to answer some basic questions. How do you distinguish yourselves? I mean, I know how you distinguish yourself. You keep telling me you're a Georgetown Hoya, and that's special. And then what you can contribute with your skill set. So yes, and then I would begin to get my resume in the right places. But remember, every time I talk with somebody in search, they get 100 resumes a day. So you got to find someone in that search business that you can develop a relationship with. And I recommend to people, start with the 30 or so Black professionals that are in board searches. Get your resume to them and get them to know you. And people like Matrice Ellis Kirk, who has her own firm. And then I say, work with some of the boutique firms. The big firms are fantastic, but some of the boutique firms like TrueStar and what have you, those are very good. So, and I finally always tell people the old adage, there's something different between coaches, mentors, and sponsors. Coaches will help you. Mentors will listen to you. Sponsors, under my definition, will do something for you. So you need to get people who are going to advocate you, not just listen to you, but advocate for you.
Point well made. I think this will be a really good time. This is a great conversation.
No, I'm going to do my
that
point.
we have.
You promised me. You promised me.
I am, but I also want, I mean, we're having such a great time here. I want to make sure that those who
Yes.
are with us know
Get a
that they can
chance.
also join the conversation. If you have any questions, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. We're using the Q&A box for today's questions. And so love for you to throw them in there, and I'll be happy to pose them to Barry. So Barry, with that, I'm gonna finally let you get to your second point.
No, the only reason I mentioned it is I think this is crucial.
Yeah.
And that is, if you look at boards, they range from 10 to 12 people. And a good many of them are CEOs, CFOs, sitting or retired. People spend on average 12 years on boards. The bottom line is you have a funnel where only one seat opens up per company every year or two. And there are lots of competing needs for what comes through that funnel. So I think we need to change that system. We need to look more at term limits. I think we need to advocate for slightly larger board size so you get more board refreshment. And in that process of refreshment, I think there will be more opportunities for diverse candidates. But we need some structural change.
Yeah. So how long do people normally serve? I mean, what is a normal board?
10, 12 years.
10 to 12 years.
Yeah. And worse than that, I've served on 3 companies for over 25 years. And I was a better director because the knowledge I had accumulated. At the same time, I blocked bringing in new points of view. I wouldn't do that again myself.
Are there discussions being had at the C-suite level or the board level about lessening these terms? Because that does seem like a very long time, 10 to 12 years.
Actually, I'd say both yes and no, because actually we just come through a period where people increased the retirement age beyond 72 to go up like to 75. And now it's coming back down. Because I think people realize that board refreshment is important. One of the biggest issues we have is a lot of boards that really don't do formal evaluations, either at the board level or at the individual board member level. And they are critical because that determines what skill set exists. And then you can match that with a strategic plan and figure out what skill sets you have to acquire.
So we're talking a lot about sort of the length of a board term. We talked about the importance of having a sponsor. Let's talk a little bit about sort of the number of initiatives that are out there to help increase representation of Blacks and Black executives and Black journalists on the boards. And what I mean by that is, can we talk a little bit about the tools, the education, the type of support that's available for Black executives, Black journalists, and the things that we need to be considering to be prepared and equipped to be on the board?
Well, there are a lot of good organizations doing board readiness programs, and I'm involved with one that I recommend at Santa Clara Business School. It's called the Board Corporate Readiness Program. McKinsey has leadership programs. Deloitte has leadership programs. So there are a fair number of good programs out there. There are also a large number of organizations who are collecting names and doing placement. And I myself lead a group who each year just go around the table and say, who'd you meet was interesting, and let's get their name out in the arena. Who would you vouch for? There's not enough, though. So you touched on the video where my good friend Kahina talked about, now that she's on a board, she's inundated by requests.
Yeah.
We've got to have a system where we tie into Kahina and say, Kahina, we've got several names who could fill that position that you're too busy to do, including some Black journalists.
Mhm.
And so would you advocate? Because I think, if you take the Fortune 200, say, I think we have 150, 175 Black directors. If each of them went back to their boards and said, right now, we'd like another qualified Black on the board. And if we could try to make that happen as often, that would show dramatic progress to me.
Yeah. So I have one question, and I want to turn to some of the questions that we're getting into the Q&A. Just for clarification, some of the programs that you mentioned at the various organizations or at your alma mater, what is the time commitment? Are we talking about like a few weeks course? Are we talking about a few months course? What do these courses look like?
No, I think there are all
training?
sorts of programs. The university programs are a little longer,
Mhm.
but the other programs, take Black corporate directors at Santa Clara. I think it's 3 or 4 weekends.
Okay. I just want to give people a sense of what the time commitment is.
Right.
And we also have another question coming in, from Kathy Time saying, thank you, very good information, that you listed 2 search firm resources who manage board searches. They're curious of what some of the others are, some of the other board search firms out there.
I think the best thing, since there are a number of search firms, probably 30 in all, is that we get the list out to the participants, including who are some of the Blacks in search.
Yeah.
And that's something we can do as follow-up for this.
Sure, we'll make sure that happens.
But
And
the big ones are, Spencer Stewart, Diversified Search, which is owned and run by a woman and has about 5 Black partners doing board search. Heidrick and Struggles. There are a number.
Mm-hmm. So we can certainly follow up on that. And I think we've already addressed this in terms of the board term limits. Just for clarification, we're at the question is it a 10 to 12 year term?
No.
Board.
And now typically boards have gone to annual elections.
Okay.
So that you go up for election each year. But I'm saying there is the average time that people serve is that 10 to 12 year range.
Years. What is a normal
so
board term?
You shouldn't do it unless, corporations typically will not want to look at you unless you have some run room and have that 10 or so year horizon so you can learn the company, learn the industry, and what have you. But there used to be like 3 or 4 year term limits, things like that. But pretty much all companies make you run each year now.
Okay, so now we're talking yearly term?
Annually.
Annually, okay, great. Well, I appreciate you clarifying that. And Tiara, thank you for asking that question. So we talked a little bit about sort of getting prepared and, different tools and education and different types of equipment that we can tap into. So I want to take this time because, again, you did speak with over 100 board members, and some of them did have some perspectives on this whole notion of what you call the playbook or the roadmap to getting to a board position. So we're going to play this video.
I read the materials that I'm given thoroughly, usually multiple times before board meetings. And so when I do have questions, one of the worst things you can do is ask a question that's already in the materials. I've done that from time to time. It's embarrassing because I may have missed something, but I try to make sure that when I'm asking questions and probing, that it really are those things that are sort of in between the lines of the prepared materials or the speaker's comments. So I tend to be very engaged in my boards. I have a philosophy that also came a little bit from my experience with private equity, which is in this world of sort of concern about corporate activists, you need to be your own activist in the boardroom. And so I try to play that role.
So I don't think you should speak up just for the case of speaking up. I'm not a fan of doubling down on what somebody else has said. You know, time is precious in the boardroom, and if somebody's already said it, there's no need for a reiteration of the point, unless you're arguing a counterpoint.
Continual learning. Whether it's the Black corporate directors, whether it's the NACD, also I made it my business to continually participate in forums with other directors to try to get additional knowledge that I could bring back to the boards.
You spend the time outside of the boardroom. You use those moments. You're together usually for 2 or 3 days. You use those moments at breakfast. Sometimes you go in early and ask the CEO if you can have a meeting, or ask the chairwoman, would you like to have breakfast? I was very lucky that I had, I think, one of the best CEOs of the Fortune 500 and an amazing chairwoman as my leadership, who were very open, and I knew they wanted me to be successful. So I would reach out to them. And then when something interesting came up, I would send one-to-one notes to them. Listen, not every week, they're busy. But when something relevant came up, just shooting them a note and saying, hey, have you seen this?
So again, a lot of, I'm sorry.
Other courses that NATC gives. Your alma mater has a corporate development. So does every other business school that I know. Darden and Wharton has one. I mean, they all have them. And you don't have to go to one with that kind of brand. You can go to one with a lesser brand that you really understand what the whole governance issue is about.
I spoke to search firms. I spoke to other board directors that I knew. I spoke to members of Moody's boards. So I spoke to everyone that I thought would have some insights around what it meant to be on a board, but also who could be helpful.
Okay, so that was a really great sort of a little bit of a recap too of some of the things that we talked about, and just reiterating how important it is to connect and talk to different people. We hear mentioning of NACD as another outlet for training. And this kind of came in as one of the follow-up questions. Can you give us a sense of how much these training programs cost? And I'm sure it varies whether you're doing a few week program or a longer program at a university, but do we have a sense of ballpark how much these programs generally cost?
I believe they run about $7,000 to $10,000, but there are scholarships, and that particularly at Santa Clara, I'm very proud. We're trying to raise $10 million for scholarships, so that isn't an issue. So that the people, a lot of times the companies pay for these.
Mm-hmm.
The argument being that you'll be better on your job if you serve on a board and had that experience. But a lot of times you're not ready to tell your company that's what you want to do. So scholarships are available.
That's good to know that those.
I got to broadcast 2 organizations that I would be remiss if I didn't mention to the group that you ought to figure out how to connect. And that is Black Women on Boards. Is an excellent organization, and the other is Him for Her. So look up those 2 organizations and see if they're appropriate for your getting affiliated with. They mentioned NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors. That's good.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you highlighting those other. I'm sure those who are watching will be quick to look into them and see how they might be able to be of support. In this last video that we just saw, a lot of discussion around how to be on a board, right? The first board member talked about making sure you're prepared, reading material ahead of time, so you're not coming in asking questions that are already in the material. I mean, these are things that I think we as journalists know the importance of being prepared. But can you share with us some other things that we should be thinking of in order to be an effective board member? Like, what are some of the things that as we're looking to, some of us may be looking to pursue this, what are some of the things that make an effective board member?
Let me mention a couple very quickly, but my approach was slightly different from Al Zoller's, and that is I selected 3 questions in advance of the meeting, and I sent them into management, and I said, be prepared, I'm going to ask about this.
Mm.
And I limited to 3 questions, because remember, the board meeting is 3 or 4 hours long. You got 10 or 12 other people. You're not going to be able to ask 10 or 15 questions, and everybody's not going to be able to ask their own 10 or 15. So I had my 3. And the second thing is I tried to figure out which questions to ask at the board meeting, which should ask at the committee level, which should be asked in the hallway, what should be asked in between meetings. And the final thing I thought was very important, you find out very quickly on corporate boards that you're not going to get much done by yourself. You have to have allies. So you have to invest time in between meetings, getting to know what your fellow board members think and letting them know what you think. So I think if you do those kinds of things, you will be much more effective.
Yes, Kahina talked a little bit about that in this last video, the importance of like interacting with your board members in between meetings, getting there early, maybe staying a little later, so you get to know one another outside of just the boardroom. This is another question that came in, and I think we touched on it a little bit early in our conversation, but I think it's worth, sort of touching on again. And the question is, how is the board culture pivoting or shifting to be more appealing to various generations from the recruitment perspective? And you talked a little bit about the need to get different voices, but, can we talk some more about, from a generational perspective, maybe getting younger voices at the table? Are you seeing a change, a pivot, a shift?
I think people are understanding that it's just not, the skill sets we need for the future are not within the purview of many of the older board members. Many companies do board evaluations, which help them do that, but many do not. I think if you look at a lot of the skill sets that are important in the future around AI, the use of technology, risk management, regulations, public affairs, it's just that they are embedded in younger people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I would say, from a journalistic perspective, we know how big of a role AI is starting to play in our work, right? So I think that, being able to understand that and know that and bring that to the board experience could also be of great value as well. So let's talk a little bit, Barry, you talked about at the top, which I think is amazing, that you've been a part of, that you've served on 16 company boards, right? Phenomenal. But in our conversation, you also mentioned that you were turned down by 6 boards, right? So that not every board is for everybody and not everybody is for every board. And so I want to talk a little bit about the types of companies or organizations or firms that Black journalists might want to be considering serving on a board for.
Well, I think that's really individual decision for the following reason. I'm a big believer that you should not limit your board selection to your domain knowledge. It's, what are you curious about? Where do you think you can make a contribution? So if I look at my boards, almost all were in areas outside of my professional expertise. Yet at the same time, all I could bring something to the table. It started with, I had a skill, audit committees, but I increased that skill set and made myself attractive. And, the 16 boards I was on, 1 came through search, only 1. The other 15 were referrals. They were referrals by a wide range of people, fellow board members, business school classmates. Sometimes they were from the professional law firms or compensation consultants or what have you. So be aware of that.
Yeah, that's helpful to know, and I'm glad you underscored that point. That it really depends on what what your interests are, right? And thinking about the skill sets that you have and how you can bring that to a board, right? And how that can go across various different industries, right? We have this question that came in from Terry Allen. He wants to, or they want us to talk about sort of the importance of securing and ensuring board officers' insurance and event insurance protecting each individual from event incidents of the organization that you serve on. The question is, do you feel it is mandated? Also, what about the benefits of I think being bonded? Talk a little bit about the insurance aspect of being on a board, protecting ourselves.
I have a controversial opinion, and that is that yes, when you are evaluating a board, you should know about their directors and officers insurance, and in particular, who else is included and what are the tiers and what have you. And that's a somewhat of a longer technical discussion. But yes, it's important that they have insurance. But I will say, from a practical point of view, I've been sued 3 times on corporate boards. Each time was for in excess of $1 billion.
Each
I've not
time
been
in
on a
excess of how much?
$1 billion. So, and I've not been on a corporation that had more than 200 million in insurance. So you'll find that the director's insurance is there, and you want it, and you want to protect not going into your own pocket. But in these suits, it's not going to be limited to the director's insurance. The most important insurance you could have, picking the company, making sure that you believe in the CEO and top managers, making sure of its reputation, understand what regular proceedings and particularly financial proceedings are outstanding. That's very important.
Mm-hmm. I think that's excellent advice. So,
but yeah, get some director's insurance. Sure. I actually find that's more important than not-for-profit boards, because that's where you might get sued for lesser amounts and for different reasons.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the NABJ member raising that question. I think that's something that's worth exploring a little bit more, but I appreciate you unpacking that a little bit and talking about the importance of making the selection ahead of like making the right selection of the board that you want to be a part of. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that, I mean, it's no secret that the news media and news in general has had, and it's having a bit of a tough go, right? Media organizations are laying people off, they're downsizing, they're changing their models. And we know historically journalists are underpaid despite our incredible accomplishments and our abilities to impact policy and change and to really report amazing stories that have national impact, that impact our communities. I want to talk a little bit more now about some of the financial benefits of being on a board, right? So we just talked about, being insured, protecting ourselves, but what are some of the financial benefits of being on a board?
Well, let me tell you first about the time requirements, because I believe for a typical board, it will be anywhere from 150 to 200 hours a year. And that's going to impinge on your work. It's going to impinge on your holidays and things like that, particularly when you're on multiple boards. The rewards today are that board packages are like 150,000 to 200,000 a year. Half of that will be in cash, half in stock. Although you'll have to pay tax up front on the stock. But if you do this for several years, it accumulates. And what I did and tell people is if you get on a board, don't spend it on improving your lifestyle. Sock it away as part of your wealth accumulation, as part of your retirement package. Because even though you're paying a lot of tax up front, the residual builds up year after year after year after year. And, you know, it's a good part of my package of what I'm giving to my kids, or my accumulated stock position and board fees.
Great
But
financial.
the compensation is not insignificant
Hmm.
over time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's, you know, potentially great compensation, but on the other hand, you're giving a lot of your time, right? You're giving a lot, you might be giving a lot up. So something to consider. We are winding down. We only have a few minutes left. So if you have other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I'd love to pose them to Barry. Barry, you know, before we wind down, I wanted to just get us to talk a little bit more about, you know, I guess almost like the final pitch, right? The final pitch for why journalists should be considering this, and you know, why it's of value. And part of that, I'm hoping in your answer, you can also maybe share with us a highlight. You know, we as journalists, we love to like report a story and see that it's made some impact or some change. Can you talk with us a little bit about sort of some of the decisions that you've made as a part of a board and how you've seen some of those decisions play out? And then maybe on the flip side of that, you know, some of the challenges that you faced by being on a board.
Well, I hate to end with this because I have to say rule number one is what happens in the boardroom stays in the boardroom. No, I think that's a challenge for journalists. Because a lot of what you encounter in the boardroom will have to stay in the boardroom. A lot of times it's not even shared yet with stockholders. So I can't share specific examples, but I can tell you, as I said in the beginning, your everyday lived experience are what you have to be effective in the boardroom. Mm-hmm. So I think journalists are great.
It almost sounds as if we would have to treat it like a confidential source, right? I mean, journalists are used to doing that. We get information, we won't release who told us the information, even if under pressure. And so depending on the role that you have at the time and your position on being on the board, like you have to, look at it. It sounds like as if this is a protected confidential source, right? So I think that's something that we have a lot of experience with.
But let's describe it this way.
Yeah.
When you're on the board, you're not there to replace or supplant management. You're there to make management more effective or change it. Mm-hmm. So you are constantly looking for new markets, new ways to do things. And that to me is a journalist. You're searching for new stories, new approaches all the time. So again, you just have that disposition in your DNA to be effective.
Yeah. So we're getting some really great questions coming in here at the end. One of them from Nicole Johnson is, at what point in our career should we pursue board positions?
Well, I think the most important thing is start now. Start get your name out in your networking. The key thing is again, you want that good 10-year run to be effective on boards. And what I point out is private companies are a lot more open to having much younger people because they're younger. Mm-hmm. The venture capital backed, private equity backed companies and what have you. So I wouldn't say save this to your 50s or 60s. Start now.
Yeah. So another really great question coming in. I think we're some good this conversation. As a journalist charged with ethical storytelling, truthful ethical storytelling. Is paid board officer compensation good for our resume, career growth, our ethics? And what are the components of a paid gig in terms of cash, stocks, freebies, perks, etc.?
Well, I think I described the basic compensation of larger companies. Private companies, there's more stock and less cash. There are a lot of perks, insurance, and what have you, but all those are disclosed. The best way to look at that is get the SEC filings of a company. They have to disclose all that up front.
Yeah, I think my response to this, and it's certainly, I'm not sure we have a whole lot of time to get into, but I think it's a really excellent question. I think it's something that I would run past my leadership, my management at the media organization that I'm working with. I mean, it's no different than, when you're out in the field reporting and someone wants to give you a gift, and in the organizations that I've worked for, I do not accept gifts when I'm out reporting a story. And so I think these are conversations that if you're interested in serving on a board, depending on where you are in your career as a journalist, that is a discussion I think would probably best be had with leadership at your organization to make sure that there are no conflicts of interest and that you can first off do your job as a journalist and then also participate if we're talking about a paid corporate board position. So certainly something I would recommend a conversation with your leadership at the
Again, I emphasize, I think serving on private company boards is equally attractive as serving on public company boards. And it has a lot less of those hurdles.
Yeah, very important to note. So, well, look, time is running out here. Barry, it's been great to chat with you. I wonder if you have any parting words for our participants. This has been a really rich and informative, I've learned a lot, conversation. And so any parting words that you would like to share with our participants?
I think speaking up is important. And I think individually, making your desires known is very important. Nobody is losing sleep about whether you're on a board or not. There are people out there who are willing to help you, but you got to let them know that it's something you want and that you would be an excellent candidate. So plenty of work to do.
Awesome. Well, I'm sorry. What was the last thing you said, Barry?
No, I said plenty of work to do in advance.
Yes. Well, thank you, Barry, so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise, to share your experiences. This has been a great conversation. For those who are joining us, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to join us for this conversation. Just a reminder that NABJ offers year-round training, development, and networking opportunities. If you are not already an active member, please join our family or renew your membership. It's really easy to do. All you have to do is to go to the NABJ website. And so we encourage you all to get engaged. If you're not, if you've done a little bit and you feel like you want to do more, we're open to it. And thank you so much again for being with us this evening. And Barry, thank you.
I thank you.